Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. So we've been spending an inordinate amount of time inside of our house. And one of the advantages that we've had by spending so much time at home right now is that we are really getting a rhythm down of our lives. In fact, if you listen to recent podcasts, we've been talking about trying to master our introverted sensing or memory inferior function or 3-year-old function. And we're both ENPs. I'm an ENTP. Joel, you're an ENFP. And we've discovered that part of the key to our success is making peace with a more routinized life. And as we were discussing why we think that this has come with so many different advantages, was it me or you that came up with the metaphor of the foundation?
I don't remember, but I think of that word now. I can't get out of my head. It's this idea of foundation for our lives or our personality types, quite frankly.
Yeah, there's this idea that we're building an entire structure and it's on top of our inferior or 3-year-old function, which is kind of an interesting idea because we've always also discussed the 3-year-old or inferior function as a blind spot, which it is. It has a tendency to be something that we struggle to really master, to really understand the importance of. We tend to resist it for a long time since it's the polarity opposite of our dominant or driver function in the car model. And so we as people, not just you and me, but as all personality types, we have a tendency to push the inferior or the 3-year-old function away. And in our podcast, and actually basically in almost everything we do, we recommend people focus on developing the co-pilot or auxiliary function in the car model because we feel like that's really high leverage. But once you've done some work there, once you've really sort of mastered the auxiliary or co-pilot function, one of the things that we believe is super high leverage down the line, one of the dominoes that comes later, is the idea of really kind of creating a dynamic of recognizing the importance and value of not developing the 3-year-old or inferior function, not like pouring a lot of time and effort and real estate into making that really good, but more stabilizing it and recognizing its value and worth.
I would say it's don't push it away. There's aspects of my life, for example, that I have a tendency to be like, ooh, that feels icky because it's surrounded that introverted sensing, that memory process of routine, structure, stability, legacy, things that are like templates. Like I tend to want to reinvent the wheel all the time. So I push away these parts of myself and it takes away the ability for me, again, that word foundation, to build a foundation for my life because I try to go, I can do it without that. I'm going to see if I can make all of this happen by leaning on the 2 front processes in my car model, that extroverted intuition, driver or exploration, and that co-pilot of introverted feeling, and maybe even my 10-year-old tertiary. But man, that little baby SI, introverted sensing memory process, 3-year-old, man, I don't want that anywhere near me. And then it robs me from getting traction in my life, from being able to create stability moving forward. So I think it's something like, I think it's really key what you just said, Antonia. It's not necessarily we're recommending you go and work on right now. If you're like, oh, they're talking about the inferior 3-year-old, maybe I should go focus on that. But it's recognizing where you need a good foundation from that in your life for your entire personality to thrive from.
Right. So then the question becomes, if I'm not working on it and developing it, then what's the leverage point of using that inferior 3-year-old function as a foundation? Like, how should I be looking at it, and what are the things that I should be doing in order to make it a good foundation? So we're using this metaphor of a building built on top of a foundation to describe some of the things you can do to stabilize that part of who you are, to sort of root it in and do some activities that don't necessarily pour a bunch of time and real estate into trying to make it better, because we still feel like the dominant driver and the co-pilot auxiliary functions are your leverage point. And most of the time, if you've got those really well developed, you'll make up for the blind spot of that inferior 3-year-old function most of the time. But there are ways in which you have to acknowledge its importance and honor it and do activities or sort of introduce things into your lives that will honor that part of who you are.
If you're a longtime listener, you'll remember, and if you know type, you'll remember and know there are four perceiving cognitive functions, meaning information gathering or learning cognitive functions in personalities, and there's 4 decision-making valuative functions in personalities. So what we can do today is let's start with the perceiving functions. This is how we gather information. This is how we perceive our world, learn information, understand things, and we could talk about those 4 as inferior for all the different personality types that would use them.
And of course, if you want more information on this, please feel free to look up the CAR model on our website, and it'll give you all sorts of great resources to talk through cognitive functions and what they look like in each personality type. So let's start with the sensing perceiving functions. There's extroverted sensing or sensation, which is the 3-year-old or inferior function for the INJ types, INFJs and INTJs. And there is introverted sensing or memory, which is the 3-year-old or inferior function for ENP types, ENTPs and ENFPs. For both the sensing functions as an inferior, as a 3-year-old, one of the things that we are challenged with, all of those of us who lead with intuition, is an idea of attentiveness. We are so in our imaginations. We're so in our minds and on our implications and what if questions and all sorts of possibility thinking that we just forget to pay attention to day-to-day life. You mentioned, Joel, as ENPs, we use introverted sensing or memory as our 3-year-old or inferior. And there's this sense that we can avoid the daily grind. We can avoid the idea of instituting templates or instituting some sort of protocol in our life, and we'll just keep reinventing the wheel and that will be fine, right? We'll just have to reinvent it every time. And even today, we were working on a project where you were helping me create a template around one of the things that we were doing, and I was resisting it hard. I was like, it's fine. I'm just making a prototype. Like, we don't have to create any sort of template for this. I'll just figure it out again on the next one. And you're like, no, let's sit this down and create a script and make it so that we have a little bit of some sort of, something that will help us the next time we're doing it.
Replicatable, right?
Yeah, let's make this replicatable. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I didn't say I want to reinvent the wheel every time, but my brain is resisting this idea of a template really hard. And it's because part of the fun of something is figuring out how to do it. Now, of course, once you've figured out how to do it, the challenge for us ENPs is we don't ever want to do it ever again because we already figured it out. So if we didn't spend that time while we were going through the discovery process of creating some sort of replicatable system, then the next time we do it, we just abandon ship because it's super boring now and I've already figured that out. The templates make it much easier the next time around. While you're figuring it out, when you create a replicatable system as you're figuring it out, now it facilitates the next, having to do it again. It makes it so much easier. And this, of course, is something that SJs know. They just know this. But we're idiots and we don't know it. And so we resist it hard. But one of the challenges really with having this function as your 3-year-old or inferior is the idea of things being mundane. Like, this is something I've already done. This is well-covered territory. So this is now mundane, and now it's boring. And so boring for a lot of ENPs is the worst word in the English language. Making peace with boredom is something that it's almost a nightmare. I feel really fortunate that when I was a kid, I was put in a lot of extremely boring situations and circumstances because I learned to make peace with boredom. But I see my fellow ENPs struggle with this like crazy. How do I get through boredom?
If you're an ENP, you probably resonate with what Antonia is talking about, where you get started on something, you get down the road on a project or something you're doing, and then something else shiny catches your eye, and you're like, man, I'm kind of bored with this. I bet that other shiny thing over there is going to be much more exciting, and I'll probably follow through with that one because it seems so exciting. And then you go jump ship, you go and follow that trail, and the same thing happens. You get down the road, and it gets a little hard. You got to put some procedures or maybe some routine in place to accomplish this or keep pursuing it, and then something else shiny catches your attention. And depending on how you're wired, personally as a person, if you're an ENP, that timeline could be every day something new and shiny takes your attention, or it could be every year. It depends on you and your maturity levels and how much experience you have in life. But I think all ENPs struggle with this whole shiny object, go and pursue this new thing and jump track all the time. And that really robs us of that foundation of consistency, that foundation of routine and rhythm and cadence to your life. Because on a routine, you can't accomplish big things typically in a day. You need a longer timeline to accomplish bigger projects in your life or learn more complex things. If you want to do something complex, you have to do it over multiple days, over a longer timeline. And so a routine, a rhythm, a structure gives you the foundation to be able to actually get your teeth into something and learn that or make that thing happen.
So being attentive to the rhythm of your life, paying attention to whether or not you've got a tendency to get to a certain percentage and then jump ship, or feel a sense of stuckness and have to flee. The foundation or the leverage point of really dialing that 3-year-old or inferior function is being willing to have, as Joel just mentioned, consistency. It's making peace with boredom. It's making peace with elements of your life are going to be mundane. And this is not like boredom is not punishment, right? It's not universe punishing you. It's just a part of life. And almost every endeavor is going to require some repetition to it. So it's not like you have to now get into, all of these elements of introverted sensing or memory. You don't have to start developing the ability to go inside and really and create some sort of, rigid continuity for everything. You don't have to journal every day and go review your journals all the time. It's not really a matter of also creating a mundane life for yourself. We're not suggesting that. But it is a matter of making peace with mundane elements, making peace with the need to have a consistent rhythm to your life, and then building your projects or building, your structure of who you are, which is the what if, go out there, seek something new, shiny objects, all that stuff, with whatever is your co-pilot or auxiliary function, however that ends up anchoring you and helping you determine a path or what means something to you and what's important. And then the impact you want to make, which comes up in your 10-year-old or tertiary function of extroverted feeling harmony or extroverted thinking effectiveness, understanding all of that, none of that will really create a very good sort of symphony unless it's built on a foundation of consistency. So that's really the leverage point. You don't want to try to turn yourself into an ISJ. You just want that foundation of consistency and making peace with things that might initially feel like boredom.
And what's great about that is this is a platform, again, a foundation you can build creativity and chasing new ideas and shiny objects from. So as an example, we have since 2014 been recording this podcast, and we've been releasing a new podcast every week. And so we have a consistent rhythm and schedule of recording and releasing one podcast a week for over 6 years now at the time of this recording. And we get to sit down and iterate and be creative from that foundation. So we know we have to release a podcast. We know it has to be in the framework of typology and personal growth. And then we can be very creative and freeform about the types of topics we talk about and communicate and have conversation with you. We get to be creative and try new ideas from that foundation. And because we've had that foundation, we've been able to be consistent over a long enough time to build an audience, to have you tune in and listen, probably on a longer timeline than just one episode, hopefully, and build a relationship with you. But let's say we got a couple weeks into a podcast and said, okay, let's go try a YouTube channel now. And then we jumped to video. And then we're like, okay, now let's jump and do live events. And we abandoned the last thing we did. We'd never get any traction or foundation to be creative. So I see it as actually freedom to be creative. When you create these foundations in introverted sensing for ENPs, it actually enables you to do more than you could do if you kept jumping frameworks all the time or jumping foundations all the time. I see it as very freeing. I see it as being able to create a body of work to be able to communicate to people over the long term, or to create something or learn something over the long term. And this is something I think when you understand as an ENP, now a whole world unlocks to you.
I think also this idea of continuity reminds us that there is a timeline that's happening. And I think as ENPs, we have a tendency to almost miss the passage of time. We're not tracking it. Introverted sensing or memory is instinctively tracking the passage of time. But we have a tendency to sort of miss that. And so we can get to, 40, 50 years old and never made any traction because we just forgot that time was passing and we were jumping from thing to thing to thing. So that continuity also, and that rhythm and making peace with the mundane rhythm of life, reminds us that there is a limited amount of time. And so we want to leverage the time that we have. It's kind of like a come to Jesus moment. Introverted sensing or memory as a foundation gives us lots of come to Jesus moments where we realize that this is something that we have to do, like maybe we need to lock this in sooner rather than later. That's not to say that if you are 40, 50, 60 years old and you haven't established the life that you want to live yet, that, time has passed and that's just how it is. I don't really feel like it's ever too late. But you do need to start at a certain point. You do need to start creating that continuity at a certain point. And sometimes our opportunities do get taken away from us. So the sooner you start, the sooner you get there. And introverted sensing or memory as a foundation will remind us that we have to start creating, we need to start making those roots. Once we make those roots, we now have, as you mentioned, Joel, a lot more opportunities for creativity, but we have to be willing to lock ourselves into a framework around that. So let's go to the next one, which is extroverted sensing or sensation, the 3-year-old or inferior function for INJs. That would be an attentiveness to the moment, to presence. Introverted intuition or perspectives has a tendency to be inside of its mind and inside of its imagination more than any other function. Well, that's what it is, right? It's imagination and pattern recognition within its own self. So it can get lost inside of its own thought processes easier than just about anything else. And not even a thought process that necessarily has practical application. Of course, if you're an INJ and you marry it with your co-pilot or auxiliary function of extroverted thinking effectiveness or extroverted feeling harmony, that's where your practical application comes in. But if you detether from that, or if you just don't have any association with your 3-year-old or inferior function of sensation, you can forget that that life is being lived right now.
I remember talking to an INTJ once who said it was very profound for him when he realized, my body isn't just designed to carry my brain around. Like, this actually serves a purpose for me. Like, it's a physical thing that I can engage with the world around and take care of and feed and clothe and present to the world. Like, it was a profound thing for him to realize as an INTJ that his brain wasn't all there is, and his body wasn't just the carrier for that. And I think that's something that I think a lot of INJs, depending again on your experience, your age, your maturity, sometimes you have a sense of kind of being in your head all the time. And this presence brings a whole new richness to your life. It's a visceral sense of being alive in the moment. And quite frankly, it feeds into your introverted intuition. It gives you better pattern recognition because you're experiencing things that now your subconscious or unconscious mind can ruminate on over time, and newer insights can bubble up to the surface. So it does serve you, and it's a foundation of that presence of personal care, of being mindful of the body and the mind connection that the body brings that really serves you well as an INJ.
Now, again, this is not a matter of pouring a bunch of mental and emotional and physical, really, real estate into developing extroverted sensing or sensation necessarily. Like, you don't have to go, if you want to, go pick up, some sort of martial art if you want, or hit the gym a lot, or go to take up a sport. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But it's more about the leverage point of building a foundation on presence. And what that looks like for INJs is oftentimes action. An INJ is building a structure on a solid foundation of extroverted sensing or sensation when they're getting into action and getting ahead of problems. Introverted intuition or perspectives has a tendency, almost kind of like extroverted intuition or exploration, a tendency of almost feeling like there's a lot of time, right? Like I can deal with that later. I just need to be more ready. And because introverted intuition is the dominant or driver function of IJ types, INJs, and going back to the firm model, there's a tendency to want to feel invulnerable. There's a perpetual preparation issue that INJs deal with that makes it so that they kick cans down the road. They can do it for, they can do it for years, literally. And then their life passes them by as well. And so they never get into action. They want significance and meaning, right? Introverted intuition or perspectives wants meaning. Extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling, depending upon the type of INJ, wants to have impact. And introverted thinking or introverted feeling, depending upon the INJ as the 10-year-old or tertiary, also wants to make sure that they're being honest with themselves and that they're in alignment with the things that mean something to them. But they'll never be able to actually have the impact they want unless they're in action, that they're engaging with the real world around them. And that sensation or extroverted sensing function reminds them that they are the sensory instrument that engages with the here and now. Like their bodies are the thing that registers the here and now, the present moment. And so that also means that they get more in touch with the things that are going on with them physically, and they won't ignore maybe maladies or illnesses. They'll be in touch with those things that the instrument of their body as a feedback mechanism is giving to them.
It also helps the INJ realize that right here and right now is all there really is. Because they're so future-paced, as an INJ, if you're listening, you think a lot about the future, whether you want to or not. It might just come to you. You might just have it almost happen to you, thinking about implications of things. What's coming down the road? How will this relationship I'm in end up? How will this business I'm building become something in the future? And sometimes you're so focused on that, and maybe not even intentional, just like I said, it happens to you. It's good to be reminded of, well, all that I actually am is what's happening right now. This is what is. So it helps you get in touch with what is happening right now. And let's say you're struggling with anxiety or mental health issues. You're future pacing something. It's making you anxious. This process, this foundation gives you a sense of, wait a minute, I am safe right here and right now. I am financially secure right here and right now. Yes, I can future pace something maybe in the future that would be different than my current situation. But right here, right now, in this present moment, I have the resources I need. I have what I need to make it through, the health, the attention, whatever. So I think it's a really good reminder. It snaps you into the moment, it makes you aware of what's happening.
So for ENPs, if the leverage point of that 3-year-old or inferior is making peace with boredom and getting into a consistent rhythm, for INJs that have extroverted sensing as their 3 or inferior, it's getting present and getting into action, right? That old adage of measure twice, cut once, measure twice, don't measure 400 times. Like you have to get to the moment of cutting. You have to get to the action of doing something right here, right now. And a lot of times it's easier to kick the can of action down the road if you're always in your imagination. So getting present, right? Doing presence work. There's a ton of literature and recommendations on meditations you can do, but I wouldn't actually get into very much meditation. I would recommend not getting into meditation. I would recommend doing more of something like physically engaging with the world around you, like touching textures, tasting food, like running or physically like exercise are one of the best leverage points you can do to really remind yourself that this is the world you're living in. Your head, yeah, that might be the real world to you, but it's not the world where you're going to have the impact that the rest of your personality type desires to make. So getting into action is the leverage point for building a foundation on top of that 3-year-old.
So we look at intuitives, ENPs, and INJs. In the 3-year-old position, you're going to either have introverted sensing or extroverted sensing, and this is where that attentiveness comes to in your life that you build a foundation off of. As we move over to sensors, ESPs and ISJs, that 3-year-old or inferior process is going to actually be intuition. It's going to be one of the intuitive processes, either extroverted intuition, we've nicknamed exploration, or introverted intuition, which we've nicknamed perspectives. These processes help you as a sensor, if you are one of these types, get in touch with the implications of things in your life, the meaning, the purpose, the why, the reasons for things.
If you're an ESP, that means you lead with extroverted sensing or sensation. And that makes your 3-year-old or inferior function introverted intuition or perspectives. And you have the opposite problem of INJs. Whereas INJs only think about implications and they have to get into the moment and get into action. ESPs are extremely good at getting into action and getting ahead of problems and moving quickly. The challenge that an ESP can have if they're pushing away that 3-year-old or inferior or allowing it to be a blind spot is that they're not thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions. Sometimes they're just impulsive. Like you as an ESP may, especially if you're in a position of pain, may take some pretty cavalier actions and not really consider what it means for you down the line. It's the opposite of kicking the can down the road. It's not even thinking that down the road exists at all. And for ESPs, there's a sense of wanting to be free and wanting to have freedom of motion and wanting to be able to play. ESPs are incredibly playful. But if there's no sense of the balance between being playful and setting yourself up for the future, then you play now and work later. There can be more of a balance, though. There can be a work-play balance now that allows a work-play balance to continue on. And introverted intuition or perspectives allows an ESP to remember that there are things that are coming down the line. And with all of these 3-year-old or inferior functions, there's going to be some fear that is manifest in the inferior function, right? There's going to be a little bit of like, there's going to be a sense that this is not my sandbox.
Insecurity, really.
Exactly. And a smaller amount of territory to take in. I mean, kind of famously, introverted intuition or perspectives as a inferior function or 3-year-old function can create paranoia. But there can be paranoia for ENPs in their inferior or 3-year-old of introverted sensing or memory. There can be a little bit of paranoia that lives in there too. And for INJs, there's a little bit of fear around extroverted sensing or sensation. Like there's a sense that they don't have full control over their body and they might get hurt. So there's always some fear that comes along with the 3-year-old or inferior, and that's why we have a tendency to push it away. For ESPs, thinking about future implications can come with some fear of the future, some paranoia and anxiety that they can't control it. But when you build on a foundation, a strong ESPs build on a strong foundation, it's a recognition that you actually can, to some extent, influence future events. You can't fully control it. There are always going to be nodes in the system that you can't do anything about. But if you do the right things today, you can have a strong influence on how the future pans out. So it's a sense of feeling like you have some control over all of this. You make peace with the idea that influence can be enough, right? Like you do the right things almost in a karmic sense. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that karma exists, and I'm not encouraging ESPs to believe in karma. But there is a sense that if you do things the right way, you increase the odds of it being returned to you. Doesn't always pan out that way. Sometimes it doesn't. But you can have some control over what your future looks like to some extent. And one of the on-ramps to that is to understand meaning, right? Because introverted intuition or perspectives is always asking about the meaning of something. It's always asking a why question. And if you're perpetually in a play mentality, or if you're always in a life is a game mentality, which is fine, that there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. But there's wisdom in asking what the meaning of your game is to you. What is the meaning of your life? And if you come up meaningless, or if you've lost your meaning, or if you feel like you've borrowed meaning from other people and it really isn't honest for you, then you're far more likely to do what's called mistakes of commission. It's almost like a self-sabotaging place. So to build on a strong foundation of that 3-year-old or inferior function of perspectives, the one thing that's the leverage point is to determine the meaning of your life. Why are you here at all? And is that your authentic meaning? Is it honest for you to feel that way? Or are you simply borrowing other people's meaning because you don't want to have to think about it?
Because extroverted sensing is so immediate, it's here and now, right here and right now, the present moment, it's sometimes difficult to see what's coming down the road. And I think a really great metaphor and a way for ESPs to be thinking about how things play out is to use almost a farming metaphor or a seasonal growing metaphor. This idea of you reap what you sow. In the present moment, if you have a seed and you plant it in the ground, in the present moment, all that is a seed. And if that's all you paid attention to, you would just assume it's just a seed and it has nothing else, it has no other meaning beyond that. You plant it in the ground, you water it, sunlight hits it, warmth hits it. Over several months, that seed might grow into a stalk of corn, as an example, right? Or some other fruit or vegetable or tree over a long enough timeline. So this idea of planting things and then letting time happen for them to grow into something in your mind's imagination, that introverted intuition, being able to see, oh, okay, the meaning of this thing I'm planting now will grow and be harvested at something later. So this is something I think, this seasonal idea. And I think extroverted sensing, maybe it's tropey to say this, but a lot of SE or extroverted sensing users are very into sports. And sports has a season, a cycle. You know, if your team does well this year, they might win a championship. But that means next season, they won't have as many opportunities for drafting new players, as an example. Well, reverse that. Your team does bad this season. Next season, they can draft more players because they have more opportunity to get newer and better players on their team. So these are ideas, I think, if you're extroverted sensing lead, if you are an ESP, to be thinking about the implications of what this season means for next season. And I think that's a way that introverted intuition can start to see implications of things on a longer timeline.
Now, once again, that doesn't mean that you have to really dive into introverted intuition or perspectives activities, right? You don't have to you don't have to go on a 10-day Vipassana retreat if you don't want to. You don't have to start thinking about future pacing and future implications and how technology is going to pan out for the next 10 years or try to get into everybody else's perspective and mind read. Like, this is not an encouragement to take your precious time and energy and pour it into something that is you're in 3-year-old or inferior. Once again, it's about leverage points. And so the leverage point is to recognize this idea of reaping and sowing and to take what you're talking about, Joel, that idea of seasonal, sort of how the seasons of maybe sports work, and maybe take that and extrapolate that and apply it to longer timelines, even 10, 20, 30 years down the road.
Seasons of life, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Seasons of life. And the one question, the why question that is the highest leverage for an ESP is the one around personal meaning. Like, why am I here? Why does my life have meaning and value? Like, what is it that that means something to me? And of course, just like with all of the other types, if you do solid work in your co-pilot or auxiliary function of either introverted thinking accuracy or introverted feeling authenticity, depending upon what kind of ESP you are, then that's going to highly facilitate some of that questioning. Like, it's going to help you remember what your values are or what is honest for you, like what makes sense to you. And you can pull on some of that in order to help craft what you believe your personal meaning is. But once you have meaning, that gets you in touch with the idea of what direction you want to go. That meaning helps you create a sense of, well, if it was an ENP, we'd say continuity. But as an ESP, it's more about a sense of purpose. And so it helps you make better choices and better decisions because you're going to be making quick choices and quick decisions. If you have an underlying sense of purpose, then those decisions that you make will always be there to facilitate or serve you, rather. And that's the really strong foundation you build the rest of your building on top of. So moving to ISJs, those of you who lead with introverted sensing or memory have extroverted intuition or exploration as your 3-year-old or inferior function. And this is also about implications, but it's a little different than consequences. It's a little different than just sort of an implication of the consequences of your action. This is more of like a question of what then? Because extroverted intuition or exploration asks a lot of what if questions. what if this happened? What would happen if this happened? And when you have that as your 3-year-old or inferior and you push it away, there's this sense that if I get my life in a perfect routine, if I just control every aspect of my life, and I get my perfect life of nothing is ever disrupted, my routines and my rituals are never disrupted. Well, what then? What's the implication of getting what you want, that ideal life? Will you have a life that is big enough to contain all of your own personal, like your heart's desires? Because the challenge with introverted sensing or memory is that when it's left to its own devices, it won't deviate much, right? It doesn't do any deviation, and it will get itself into a rut. So it keeps the ISJ small. Now, all of us in our 3-year-old or inferior function, this is, as we've talked about in other podcasts, this is our aspiration. This is something that whispers into our ear. So while an ISJ, if they push their extroverted intuition 3-year-old inferior way, while they may feel like they've got the ideal life, that part of them is still whispering into their ear, and they still want something maybe a little bigger, something more exciting, something that gives their life a little joie de vivre, a little adventure, right? The implication here with this intuitive function isn't the implication of consequence to bad action. It's less the mistake of commission than it is the mistake of omission. It's this idea that you get to the end of your life and your life is filled with the regrets of the things you didn't do.
Yeah, it's all the regrets and ponderings about the what ifs in the past. Like, what if I'd gone on that crazy trip to South America, Machu Picchu, hiking when I was invited to go, instead of staying back and staying in my normal routine and consistency? Like, what if I'd taken those 2 weeks? How would my life maybe have been different? Who would I be different today? What could I maybe have unlocked in myself and learned about myself had I done that? And I think almost seeing it from a perspective of the end of your life, looking back, what are the things that you wish you'd do foundational now to unlock those parts of yourself? So it's a little bit of an imagination you're going to have to use. Play with some timelines, almost project yourself into the future on your quote unquote deathbed, if you will, looking back over your life to say, what if I had taken opportunities as they arose to explore more? How would that have changed who I am over the long term?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a matter of again, we're not encouraging you to do, put too much time in mental real estate or emotional real estate into this function. Like, you don't have to become like an ENP all of a sudden and do a bunch of crazy extroverted intuition or exploration things. But it's more a matter of, how could I have expanded the territory of my life? How could I have made things a little bigger? Like, if we're looking at it in terms of building a structure on top of a territory, how can I expand that territory? I don't really want to keep it small, do I? I want it to be more expansive. I want my life to have a little bit more to it than just, the routine that I've set. Because, of course, a routine that cannot budge is what we call a rut. So it's making peace with change. It's making peace with all of the positive things that come with change. Because change can be threatening, right? Just like all of these 3-year-old or inferior functions, there's some fear that comes around here. And the biggest fear that ISJs have with this inferior function is that they won't be able to handle the change that's thrown at them. It'll be too much, and they won't be able to make peace with it. So it's not really a matter of necessarily doing all of these big, crazy things. It's more making peace with how much change actually increases the pleasure of our life, increases the joy of it. That sometimes these changes are for our benefit. In fact, often they are. And the people that we become more textured, right? We have more to us as we expand to fill the spaces of these changes. So it's a matter of building a foundation on something bigger, something larger, something a little bit more, right? Something filled with a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more adventurous. And I think that when an ISJ does that, their satisfaction in life goes way up.
I think the question an ISJ can ask is, to what end, or what am I preserving here? So I remember my aunt is an ISTJ, and we would often come and visit my aunt and uncle and my cousins as kids. I remember showing up in Atlanta once to visit them, and being ISJs, they have a very tight routine. Everybody's going to bed at like 8 o'clock at night, getting up at 5 in the morning, and they never broke. Their family never broke from their schedule, even like when we would come to visit. And I remember my cousin basically asking his mom, my ISTJ aunt, saying, hey, now that Joel's in town, can I take the day off of school tomorrow and we can go to a water park nearby and just play around and have fun? And she said, absolutely not. We've got to keep our discipline, keep our schedule going. So I just sit around and wait for him at school all day while he was on his routine. Now, she might have had her good reasons for that. As an ENP, I probably don't honor her reasons as much. But you could look at that and go, you know what? It's not that we came maybe once a year at most to visit them. One day missing school isn't going to probably be that big of a deal. There might be an opportunity for our family to have a little adventure today. Maybe we take off work and school and change our routine up a little bit because we have people visiting us. But they would absolutely never break their routine when we would come to town and visit. So these are the things, we're not even talking about big life shifts, even just little opportunities for adventures or connecting with someone. If you're so focused on maintaining the system and the structure that you've put in place, you're so focused on that, sometimes you forget the whole point of why that system or structure is there to begin with. It's to facilitate your life, right? And all the excitement and joy that can come from a life. So I think that's the little shift here is the foundation is to have space for opportunities to arise, maybe unexpected opportunities that are outside the systems that you've built that you can take advantage of that bring richness to you, that give your life implication and meaning.
Yeah, if ESPs are about play, ISJs are usually about maintaining a sense of continuity and comfort. And sometimes the life that we've built for ourselves, it's comfortable because it's familiar, not because it's actually comfortable. And so having a little bit of wiggle room, being willing to see outside of the system that you built, oftentimes what's outside of that is a better life, right? Is like an ability to have a life that you would actually want to acclimate to more because it's more fun or it's just more enjoyable or there's more richness there. So the foundation of an ISJ's 3-year-old or inferior function is making peace with change, making peace with joy and possibilities. And like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be Machu Picchu or running off with the pilot, to Brazil or whatever. Like it can just be maybe shaking things up a little bit or asking, what in my life would I like to have different? Or just that question alone. Is there anything in my life that I would actually change? And be honest about it, right? Be willing to be honest about it, even if it means you'll have to make uncomfortable changes to get there, right? What would my life look like if I was willing to change it to something better and do the work of getting there? ISJs have extroverted feeling or extroverted thinking as their co-pilot, depending upon what type they are. And those are functions that are actually really good at setting plans up, at being able to execute and implement the changes that you want to make. And then the entire system, like the system of your personality, all of it benefits if you're willing to make some of those changes to go towards a happier life.
You know what I want to do? Let's make a 2-parter and talk about the judging functions of the 3-year-old or inferior place on the next episode.
Okay, that sounds good.
And you've been here right now with us without a microphone, but we want to hear from you. What's coming up for you? Are you one of these types we talked about? How have you found a good foundation for your life? Where do you struggle with a foundation in your life? We want to hear your questions, your comments. Share your story with us. You don't have a microphone, but now's your chance to come over to personalityhacker.com, leave a comment, share your story under this episode. We want to hear from you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. We have programs available at personalityhacker.com. Go to personalityhacker.com and look under courses and see if there's a program that is right for you. We highly recommend the Personality Development Starter Kit, especially if you're looking for leverage points in growing your personality type. And of course, our book is available. You can get it at Amazon, Books A Million, all major retailers. And what are you laughing? Joel's laughing.
I was just remembering last episode we talked about someone took a picture of themselves with multiple copies of the book. I was kind of kidding, and somebody actually had multiple copies. I don't think it was 11 copies for the zombie apocalypse, but they had like 4 or 5, like a handful of them, because they were donating them to local libraries. So they had a bunch on hand, and they actually sent a picture in on Facebook. It was great. It
was funny, though, because it backfired just a hair, because they said, look, I have plenty of toilet paper. And another person's like, yeah, you can also use, and they talked about the opposite political affiliation from them as toilet paper, like something that was a part of the opposite political affiliation. And I'm like, that probably makes it look like they don't like the book if they're going to use it for toilet paper. So it's one of those things where like, yeah, tag us on social media. That would be funny. And I'm like, this might have not given the message we wanted to give.
I still think 11 copies is perfect for the zombie apocalypse, though. It's not just, I mean, yeah, toilet paper could be one use, but maybe propping up a table, or you could use it to hide things in. I've talked about that before.
Yeah, we have. There are many.
You cut out a little flask, and you can hide a flask in one of them on your bookshelf. No one would know.
But shout out.
You can give them away as gifts. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff you could do.
Shout out to Amanda and your significant other, Amanda, for the picture, even though I think it might have backfired a little. That said, our book is available, so go grab a copy. And you can also leave a rating and review of the book on Amazon. That also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.